Today we will be talking about Saudi Arabia as an oil producer, consumer, and exporter. Did you know that Saudi Arabia is one of the largest oil producing countries, causing them to find alternative energy sources because of the high demand? In this presentation, we will discuss Saudi Arabia's success as an oil producer and exporter, discovering the use of natural gas, and then finding renewable energy sources as an alternative. Saudi Arabia has one of the largest oil production capacities in the world. Its largest and most prosperous field out of the 8 in Saudi Arabia is the Ghawar Oil Reserve. This reserve is estimated to have 70 billion barrels of the remaining reserves. The Ghawar Oil Reserve has not only an abundance of oil, but it is also of good quality. Saudi Arabia is known as one of the world's largest exporter of petroleum liquids. In response to this, the world relies on them to export their surplus to higher demanding countries. The consumption in Saudi Arabia has increased since the 1980s. They consume about 800 million barrels per year. It is predicted that by 2030, the demand of oil, both foreign and domestic, will exceed the amount of production in Saudi Arabia. This could cause them to import petroleum liquids instead of exporting. One way to allow access to more reserves is with fracking. Because of their limited water supply, Saudi Arabia is hesitant to adopt the hydraulic fracking practices, which leads them to become behind as a producer and exporter. As a result, other countries could become the forerunner as leading producers. The production of natural gas in Saudi Arabia started in the 1970s. Prior to that, there was no market for natural gas, so the gas was either flared off or pumped back into the oil reserve to maintain high reservoir pressure, which was needed to produce oil. Once there was a market and use for natural gas, Saudi Arabia developed a 4-step process. The first phase was to collect and process the natural gas on land so that it alleviates some of the dependence on oil. The second phase was to gather the natural gas offshore in the Arabian Gulf. The third phase is to find investors to continue production and to build refining factories. The fourth and final step is to determine who will invest and to separate upstream from downstream. Saudi Arabia's demand for petroleum liquids has increased in the last 30 years. This leads to less exporting and more local usage. In 2030, it is estimated that the production in Saudi Arabia will begin to decline and the oil reserves will become depleted. This will lead to a decline in exporting and even a demand for imports if the high consumption in Saudi Arabia continues. As a result, it causes finding an alternative energy resource their only option. Saudi Arabia needs to become less dependent on oil because of the upcoming decline in production. They have started on building nuclear, solar, and wind power resources. Saudi Arabia is a successful producer of petroleum liquids and natural gas. It is not only in the top 5 when it comes to the amount of barrels produced a year, it is also well known for its oil-rich field, the Ghawar Reservoir. As demand becomes higher domestically, Saudi Arabia has to find alternatives for energy. Their resources now have to migrate from petroleum products to producing renewable resources. But as of right now, Saudi Arabia is still the forerunner in petroleum production.